Um, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Javier. I think most of you already know me, if not from the previous webinars, from that person that answers all the time in the forums. Thank you very much for all of you to be here. I would like to make just one final sound check with all of you and to make sure that you can hear me. So now you should be able to be hearing me. If you can hear me, please type yes in the chat. So once I get enough confirmations, I can see. Okay. So thank you very much for your confirmations. And I think we can start moving forward. For the ones who cannot hear, my colleague Marcel will be sharing some instructions in the chat to how to get there. But basically, you should be doing, the suggestion is do what this slide says. Just going to the troubleshooting in case you experience problems later on, even if you hear me now. So in that sense, we start our final webinar of this virtual seminar on the 2030 Agenda and Opportunities for the Caribbean. It's been a very interesting 5 weeks to be with all of you and to share experiences with all of you and to hear everything that you have to share with others and how you can take this a bit further and how you see the positioning of FAO and the UN system in all this. So today as mentioned, is the final webinar, and it's going to be structured in this sound test that we're basically finishing right now. And then I'm going to do a brief recap of what we've already covered in sections 3 and 5, including some of the insights from the forums. But it's going to be something very brief. And after that, I'm going to pass the word to my colleague Amy Heyman, who will be sharing with you. Right after that, we're going to have a small chat with all of you. But we've already prearranged some conversation with 3 participants in the forums that usually are very dynamic, as all of you are. But these ones have been a bit more proactive. In the early weeks. In the end, I've seen that most of you have participated in the forums, and you've done greatly, and thank you for that. And after that, I'm going to be passing the presentation to Amy Heyman, who will be covering the topic of data on how important it is and how FAO works with that. And after that, we will have a Q&A part section and some next steps to cover for the end of this seminar. Thanks to all of you for confirming in the chat. I can see that, and so we've already done the sound check. And so what we've seen in sections 3 to 5, basically it's about how we go from policy to reporting progress. But to report progress, we have to have progress. So how we start from policy to get progress. In that sense, we first have to start writing nice policy documents, and nice doesn't mean necessarily to have good intentions or wishful thinking documents, but realistic and ideally binding policy documents, such as in some countries, for example, Panama, they have the 2030 vision. In Guatemala, they have the cartoon for 2032, and in Jamaica, they have the SDG roadmap, and all this combined with national development plans should be incorporating the SDG agenda, its principles, and most of the SDG targets. But after having this policy documents, we have to know how to start and how to foster progress from specific activities. We cannot do everything at the same time. So probably it would be better if we start with some entry points or accelerators. That means that maybe in a country there is you don't, for example, we don't necessarily have to fight security issues, or we don't necessarily have to fight insecurity with more police officers. We could fight insecurity with something a bit more structural. We could fight it through education, through even through the way cities are designed, activities, inequality reduction, and so on. We've also covered the importance of localizing the 2030 agenda, and this was a conversation that to me was very interesting to have in the forums, because different people came with different approaches to that and different concepts. It started from localizing an idea in different parts of the country. In other parts, it was like how to adapt policies and government interventions and all other type of interventions related to the 2030 agenda, or progressing the 2030 agenda in the national level in general, in cities, in regions, and so on. It's very difficult to assume that like the same country has the same type of development at the same level of progress throughout the whole country. For different areas in different countries, we have to consider different approaches to how to advance the 2030 agenda. So once we have these policy priorities, accelerators, and entry points, we have to consider how the government has to work within itself and with other actors to implement this in the most efficient way possible. And this is national coordination mechanisms. On the right hand side of this slide, we can see the high-level interinstitutional commission from Colombia, in which they incorporate this government or state structure, but at the same time they also acknowledge the partnerships needed from non-state actors to advance the 2030 agenda. And I think this is a nice example to consider. Another point that we had here on advancing the 2030 agenda and national coordination mechanisms was whether it should be new or old structures, and both answers are correct. We just have to be country specific and see what works better. I'm seeing some questions in the chat, and thank you for sharing them. I'm going to try to pass them on to later on the Q&A section, because we are a bit tight on time. And to finish this, it would be the importance of partnerships to advance in everything, the importance of reporting, and the importance of data. And that's something that Amy is going to cover a bit later on. So now what I would like to give the floor to is to our fellow participants from the seminar, Marcia, Juan, and Wujao, who can share just basically what they consider this seminar has been useful for them, how they can incorporate them in what they do, and what they take from, what learnings they take from the contents of this seminar and from the rest of you. Considering the time constraints that Juan indicated to me, maybe I would like to pass the word to him now. So if Juan, if that's okay with you, I can open your mic and you can start sharing. Okay, let me find Juan because, okay. So Juan, I'm gonna mute you, and after Juan, Marcia and Vuja will also share their importance. I'm seeing that some of you cannot see the presentation. That's the issue from Faye, but I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone. Juan, if you are...
Hello, Javier. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay. Thank you.
So whenever you tell me, I go.
Yeah, just okay, let us know what you think of this seminar and what you take from this.
Thank you, Javier, and thank you for the team for putting a nice course together, and thank you, colleagues, for sharing all your experiences. It has been very nice to read everything you have to say about this issue that binds us all as Caribbeans. The first thing I like to share and to say is going back to our first session. I think that one of the things I take is that we are used to think of the Caribbean in terms of limited arrangements, either because we are politically bound or economically bound in some sort of structure. And I think that the first session, when everyone gave their perspective about what is the Caribbean, I think that it helps to dismount that idea that the Caribbean is only a single market and economy, or a Caribbean community, or etc. I mean, it demonstrated that there are many Caribbeans, there are many faces to it, and that is extremely diverse region. I was very happy to see Guatemala, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Honduras, I mean, involved and speaking about their experience and how these Caribbean territories within their countries have a special socioeconomic, environmental features that we all share in the Caribbean. So I think that the challenge then would be, if we agree that diversity is a key feature of the Caribbean, I think that the challenge that I take and that I invite you all to take is, how can we actually turn this diversity into an advantage? You know, how we can turn this what it seems to be something very precious into actually something that helps leverage our efforts. And that leads me to the second point, which is interinstitutional collaboration. We at FAO, you know, we are custodians. I mean, around a number of indicators, I believe is like 31, and a larger number of targets, around some of the 6 of the SDGs. I think that we need, we individually will not be able to make much progress if we do not enhance this interinstitutional collaboration. And for me, this is the key ingredient in order to fill what many of us have identified or have called with different words, kind of implementation gaps. We need to find more custodians. We need to find more champions. And when I speak about champions, it's not only, you know, the organizations that are legally bound or are tasked, you know, formally to address the challenges around the SDGs. But, and it leads me to the third point to finish, because I know we don't have much time, is we need champions also from the private sector. We need a private sector involved that is committed, you know, that can have the traction, can have the resources, and can have the decision-making power and or influence to lead some of these things. I believe that there are opportunities in the Caribbean, but there are too much silo work, which makes our effort extremely inefficient. And we need to overcome this inefficiency in order to be effective. Otherwise, we won't be able to do it if we look at individual efforts in individual islands, in individual countries. We need to bring, finally, just to finish, the element of innovation. How to make if we are to invite other stakeholders, other partners, like from the private sector, what is it that we can innovate, you know, around the way we address, the way we interpret and we communicate SDGs that can make it attractive, you know, for private sector. And just finishing, giving one example of how La Caixa, which is a financial organization in Spain, has established an observatory on the SDGs, whereby Spanish firms use the SDGs as a kind of self-assessment tool, you know, to see how they're doing, how their performance as businesses is doing against it. So these are the kinds of innovations, and I'm sure there are many more, you know, that we could learn from. And I would leave it there for the sake of time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Juan, for your initial points. Just to point out a bit, you mentioned diversity, innovation, and the importance of working together among many other issues. So thank you so much, and maybe we can Marcia, if that's okay with you, I'm gonna unmute you, and you can build up on that, or share your other type of inputs.
Hello.
Hi, Marcia. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Thank you very much, Javier, and thank you to all the facilitators and as well to our colleagues who have been so very active in the on the platform. So really to follow on a bit from where I think one raised some of the points that I would have wanted to share as well. So I will probably just build a little on his. But before I do that, if I could just make a few general comments on the course itself. I was very happy from the beginning of the course. I think the 5 P's, the people, planet, prosperity, partnership, and peace, that struck a chord with me because it's really from my own perspective what I'm interested in and how all of these could be linked and what contribution not any one institution could make, but collaboratively how we could achieve this. So as Juan pointed to, the whole idea of interinstitutional support for the agenda. The course as well pointed very early to the issue of entry points, and you mentioned that in your wrap-up a while ago, Javier. And I think from my perspective, that is a critical issue for us with respect to the localization. I feel that from the Caribbean perspective, there has been a wide range of discussion of the agenda, of what it means and all of the goals. People know that. But the issue now of landing it specifically on the entry points, I think is perhaps where we are. And that is applicable not only in the context of agriculture and of the goals that are applicable to the FAO, but I would want to think it's across the board. I've worked in a number of areas in national security issues, in citizen security and justice issues, and labor issues. And I feel that that is where we need to go. And maybe this is something at that interinstitutional level that the FAO could seek to promote. And I don't know whether it is being promoted, but in my own experience, I've not encountered that kind of push. And I think this is a major plus that the FAO has, an advantage that it has. The issue too of data, I think the wrap up of this course has been really the part that packed the punch, the data measurement and the reporting, because there's a line in here, data is the lifeblood of decision making and the raw material for accountability. That to me was a very powerful statement and one that I think could be built on and made very applicable to the Caribbean. And to touch on one's reference to the Caribbean, the diversity that we have, I think there is, as he pointed out, there is scope for building on this and looking for avenues as to how we link all of us in the Caribbean, regardless of how we define ourselves. There clearly is shared values and shared commitment, and there is scope for building on that. One as well mentioned the issue of champions, and I think he mentioned the private sector. If I could add to that, NGOs, other NGOs as well, and perhaps the FAO could play a role in educating NGOs. NGO representatives, I have sat in a number of consultations, and NGO representatives tend to be very passionate about their particular area of interest, and rightly so. However, what I think would be helpful is education as well. And a lot of what is in this seminar might be useful to help promote that broader understanding so that NGOs too have the context and they understand why programmatic activities might need to focus on a particular area in support of a particular target. And they too can use their own networks to help bring people on board and to localize the agenda even more fully. With respect, and this is my final comment on the data gap in the Caribbean, I think there needs to be as well a fair amount of work, continued work in the area of statistics. Just to share one brief experience that I had with working with crime statistics. Across the region, there are different definitions of certain types of crime, so that you have legislation treats things in different ways, definitions are different, means of data capture is different. So there needs to be, I think, even in the area of agriculture, I am certain that there needs to be work in that area to help harmonize, to start with definitions and how to harmonize, how to capture, and as well to analyze. So my final comments, I have enjoyed this course. It has been very, very helpful. The interaction across all of us as Caribbean, regardless of how we defined ourselves, has been a very rich experience. The course, I think, was very well organized. Javier, thank you very much for your own active participation. There are times when sometimes there is a facilitator not as engaged, so that is appreciated as well. It has been, I think, very thought-provoking, very educational, and I look forward to continuing to apply what I have learned here on this course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for your inputs and for appreciating this this seminar in general. I have to before I pass the word on to Wu Zhao, I have to mention although you are the one, I am the one that you always see behind the organization of this. There's many more people who work as much or more than I do on that. And examples are some people who are in this call, who are Barbara or Marcel. All of us are working on this, but thank you in that sense. And thank you for your points when it comes to the importance of entry points, the importance of data, the gaps that can be filled, and building on Juan's points on the diversity of champions. There's one comment within the when you were sharing your inputs, Marcia. There was also it would be good to have incentives for advancing the SDGs when it comes to the private sector, and I think we all agree on that. And there's another comment. This one came from Christelle, I think, and it was a question for what if the government doesn't take the initiative of implementing the SDGs and implementing the 2030 agenda? What if the government cannot be counted on? For that, before I pass the word to Wu Zhao, I would say that first there's the principle of universality of the 2030 agenda, meaning that it affects everyone. It affects, of course, governments, and they should lead this process, but it affects also the private sector, NGOs, as Marcia was saying, and also civil society in general, academia, and so on. And I think for most parts, governments can be counted on, at least to some extent. So that's why the importance of partnerships and advocacy and trying to bring everyone together to build on these synergies. And on that, I'm going to pass the word to Wu Zhao. So I'm going to unmute you right now, Wu Zhao, and so you can share also your point of view. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hello, this is Wu Jiao. I'm from China, a postgraduate student of the Zhejiang University, and now I'm the communication intern at the FAO representation in Ghana. I'm so honored to be involved in such a great seminar. And because I just arrived here in the beginning of November, I am eager for such opportunity to learn more about Ghana and the development in the Caribbean regions. So the seminar just provides a very good platform for me. So I would like to say that I really enjoy this platform, the documents and the videos and the discussion. And not only because in the process, I can try to find more development situation in Ghana, but also I have access to the development in other countries. And I found that the 2030 agenda has been implemented to many national development plans, and there are also some the countries have made progress with it. And of course, in Ghana, we also have such a kind of national development plan, which has the 2030 sustainable goals. And I noticed that in the discussion part, many of our friends mentioned that because we have the plans, we have the projects, but we need more practice. That is, we need to more cooperation between the different departments, civil society, NGO, or the governments. And another thing important is that I think the data collection is very important, because it is very important for making policy, and it is also very important for monitoring the process. And however, I think because sometimes we lack because of some technical challenges, we have no access to latest data, and sometimes we use the data just a few years ago, so we do not know sometimes what is happening. So I think we have more and more investment in the data collection and the cooperation between the different the countries, and we can make progress. Also, that's the point that the cooperation between different countries. I think the great meaningless of this program is to exchange our ideas, because we are in the Caribbean countries, and so we share many similarities with each other. And sometimes I know that some country can do very well in some specific areas, while other countries are trying to develop itself. So we can learn from each other and learn from the prior experience, so that we do not have so much challenges as we did it alone. That's what my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Puya. I think it's very good additions, which was already difficult to add anything to what Juan and Marcia have mentioned before. So thank you. Like the importance of national development plans, the policy making, and this part of continue learning and learn from mistakes, and try to make the SDG implementation a bit smoother than it was with the MDGs, although it's more challenging, but it should be more synergetic. So at the same time, we have a bit of everything. And thank you again also for your good review of the seminar. We are aware that there are there are things that worked, and there are things in the seminar that should be improved as well. But we will be asking for, once we finish the seminar, we will be also asking for your opinions. So if you have some suggestions on how to improve, you can also share them. And I see that there are many people sending messages and so on. So maybe we could keep those inputs for the Q&A section later on, and build up on what Amy Haven is going to present right now. I'm gonna be to introduce her. She's a strategic program sustainable agriculture from FAO. She's based in Rome. I think I got it correctly, Amy. Just let me know, and I'm gonna pass over to her so she can share with us the importance of data and the challenges related to them, and everything connected to it. I'm not sure, Amy, can you hear?
Yes.
Perfect. So you can take over the presentation and start with your document, if that's okay with you.
Of course. Let me put up, can you see my presentation?
It's loading. We can see your presentation. If you make it full screen, it would be So it's view.
Yes. There we go.
Yeah, so I'm gonna unmute my mic and thank you. And Amy, I'm gonna be 5 minutes before the allocated time for this presentation. I'm gonna let you know. Is that okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I just want to thank you for allowing me to participate in this discussion. It's really an opportunity, and I'm sorry that I've missed the previous webinars. I think it would have been a great opportunity to be able to learn about some of the challenges that you face in the Caribbean. I've really had the opportunity to travel a lot, especially in Africa, but I am convinced that you face very unique challenges in the Caribbean that most countries do not experience. And I look forward to hearing about some of those today. I'm sure they'll come up, and taking them back, your challenges, back to my colleagues, so that we can understand how we can better support countries in the Caribbean in monitoring the SDGs. As Javier said, my name is Amy Hyman, and I work on the strategic side of FAO. And I specifically focus on mainstreaming sustainable agriculture. So most of my work in recent years has been around a lot of the topics you're speaking about today, and that's really more around implementation of the SDGs rather than the monitoring. Having said that, though, I do come from the statistics division of FAO. So I wear a dual hat, and specifically I've been working on formulating the methodology for one of the SDG indicators on sustainable agriculture, which is SDG 2.4.1.
Sir, Amy, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I'm getting messages that we cannot see the presentation since you made it full screen. I apologize for that. So maybe it could be better if we pass it like that. Like, let us know if we can.
Is that better?
Yeah, I've been able to see it all the time, but many people are reporting that they could not see it.
Okay. Can people confirm? If not, I'll.
Now it's a black screen, but I think that's because you're opening maybe another window. But like now we're seeing it.
Okay, perfect. So I haven't shown any slides yet, but but what I want to say is that this indicator is really multidimensional, 2.4.1, and it really tries to bridge the social and environmental.
Amy?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you again. I can see you. Okay, like I can see it, so I'm sorry. We will try to solve it technically with the rest. Sorry to interrupt you again.
Okay, so coming back to this indicator, which won't be the focus of this presentation, but I think it's important because it's really multidimensional, this SDG indicator on sustainable agriculture. And it really tries to bridge social and environmental and economic aspects of development into one indicator. And that's really the spirit of SDGs. And I've heard a lot of discussion so far about data. Javier mentioned that as well. And I just want to say that I think when I think about monitoring, I think about it as a process, which includes methodological development, data collection, capacity development, and dissemination. So data gives me the idea of something that's a bit stagnant. And of course, those are the instruments that we use then to monitor. But I think that we should look at this as a process and how we can engage within this process and improve within the process. So it's really about trying to capture progress towards the SDGs through monitoring so that countries really have more information to make better decisions. That's really the goal. Countries up in this indicator process have been in the driver's seat. And the information in the end should really primarily serve countries. And I just want to say from this presentation and this webinar, I really hope that we can explore ways that FAO can help be a catalyst to this process. So I know that you've already talked a little bit about the framework, SDG indicator framework. Yes.
I'm very sorry again. It's been confirmed that like the ones we can see it is the ones used in Sky for Business software. So I'm gonna project your presentation myself, and you can tell me when I pass the slides. Since you didn't pass any slides so far, I can just take over from them.
Perfect.
And I'm sorry for the continuous interruptions.
Okay. So I should stop presenting. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm taking over. And now people should be able to see my screen. Let me know if you see my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, Amy, you should be able to see my screen. Okay, people from the web app can see it. Okay, so we continue like that, and you tell me when we pass the slides.
Great. I understand that you've already dedicated some time talking about the global SDG indicator framework, so I won't spend much time on this. Just to say that you know that there are 17 SDG goals, 17 targets, and 232 unique indicators that respond or correspond to those targets and goals. The entire process has been governed by the UN Statistical Commission, which has formed a group called the Interagency and Expert Group on the SDGs, which is really made up of countries. As I said, countries are in the driver's seat and have made all of the decisions about what should be included and what should not be included in this process. There are 28 countries that are members, and international organizations are really there to help and to serve as support to this process. We can go to the next slide. So as you know, Grenada and Trinidad and Tobago in this cycle since 2017 are representing the Caribbean, and this changes every so often. So those are the countries that are deciding really what's happening in this international indicator framework. We can go on. Next slide. So as you probably know, and please stop me if I'm repeating myself, all of the indicators have been categorized into 3 different tiers. The third tier is the most challenging, and those are indicators that have been proposed but really don't have a methodology or don't have international standards, and therefore don't have any data. Tier 1 are the indicators that are already established, have international standards, have a methodology, and are regularly collected for more than 50% of the countries. And Tier 2 falls in the middle, where there's an established methodology, but really not a lot of data. And so every year, all of the indicators are assigned a Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. We can move on. So what is the role of the custodian agency like FAO? It's really about trying to help develop methodologies behind these indicators and to produce the documents for these indicators. It's also to work very closely with countries on capacity development to generate and disseminate national data. Its job is also to help countries collect the data, so work with national statistical offices who are collecting the data and help assist them with that to ensure comparability and consistency, and then to be the intermediary between countries and the international statistical dissemination process through the UNSD. As I said, it's really to help kind of monitor and help prepare reports and presentations on the SDG indicators. So FAO is one of many organizations that serve as a custodian agency. Next slide. So SDG has been assigned 21 SDG indicators for which responsible, and it really spans, as you can see here, across 6 different goals. So FAO's mandate, and you see, it's, as we all know, that food and agriculture is really at the heart of the SDGs. Okay, that includes food security, gender, water, land, etc. So you can see from this that when the whole process began in November of 2015, which is when the tiers were originally assigned, this was the first meeting of the IAEG SDGs, 13 out of FAO's 21 indicators were assigned Tier 3 status. So you can imagine that these are really interesting indicators. We know that technicians thought it was a great idea that we should try to measure, for example, the one on which I worked, which is 241, sustainable agriculture. But there was really no definition or no way to capture this. So that's really reflected here. And if you see the next slide, and there are only 3, as you can see, only 3 green indicators, which are the Tier 1. As you can see, this past cycle, we've really come a long way with FAO's support. So we only have one indicator, which is a fisheries indicator, that's still a tier 3. Many other indicators have been changed or reclassified to tier 1 and tier 2. So that's really exciting because that really means that we can now start rolling out these indicators in countries and trying to collect meaningful information that hopefully countries will be able to use. Okay, next. FAO is really working to try to support countries in this process, and it's doing it around methodological development, capacity development, data collection, coming up with new methodology, helping to support countries in their reporting, so VNRs, and trying to work on communication and advocacy, specifically or primarily around the 21 indicators for which it's responsible. Now here I'm speaking specifically from a perspective of monitoring for FAO. Of course, the work of FAO goes beyond these 21 indicators in terms of implementation. So here I'm specifically, the definition is a little bit narrow, just related to monitoring. So we can go on. Again, in terms of developing methodologies, we've worked on trying to reclassify the tier 3 indicators, and we've been quite successful. We've also come up with a lot of new definitions. For example, there was no pre-existing definition to small-scale food producers or rural and urban areas. It seems crazy that we didn't have an internationally established definition of what rural area meant. And FAO has been working hard to try to garner international support and to come up with these definitions. FAO has also been working to develop instruments, and we'll see a little bit more as we go on what FAO has been doing to help support countries. We can go on. So in terms of capacity development, FAO has developed a whole series of e-learning courses. Ideally, soon we'll have e-learning courses for all the 21 indicators for which FAO is responsible. We've also been working hard in regions to have training workshops and come up with tools that will be useful in helping to support countries in this process. I believe up until now, there may not have been necessarily a training in the Caribbean, but one of my colleagues unfortunately was able to join, who has now become the sub-regional statistician. And I know that there's some plans in the pipeline to start rolling out some training within the Caribbean, so that should be quite exciting. We can move on. So here are some of the e-learning courses that are ready to go. These have been designed for a broad audience, but also keeping in mind people who are sitting in national statistical offices or line ministries that are responsible for monitoring these or producing these SDG indicators. And you can see we've already come a long way. We have 9 or so e-learning courses, and they're quite comprehensive. They take a lot of time, but very, very informative, both about explaining the indicators as well as monitoring. And if you go to the next slide, you see the ones that are under production. Unfortunately, there's a mistake here. You see 251 and 252 appear on the slides, but those modules are actually ready, so they should be removed from this. So there's a lot of interesting work going on to help provide instruments for countries to monitor the SDGs. And for sure, whatever documentation or whatever website you have, we'll make sure that this is updated as much as possible. Okay, next. As I said, there are also lots of regional and global workshops. We've had 40 plus trainings in over 120 countries in the past couple of years. And what we're trying to do is really to build capacity, South-South cooperation within areas, regions, so that people in countries can support their neighbors. And I think we've been quite successful in trying to hopefully achieve that. And maybe we can start thinking about doing that a little bit more in the Caribbean. Next. FAO also developed a reporting platform. As you can see, this is more on the content side, so where you can find guidelines, training materials, enumerators, manuals, any sort of information related to a particular indicator, as well as a data dissemination platform. So information will be collected from countries, will be disseminated into this, put into this platform for dissemination, and then that information will be reported to the UN Statistics Division for National Reporting. Okay.
Amy, 5 minutes more or less until we start the Q&A.
Next slide. Again, FAO is also working on the implementation side and does a lot to support countries in drafting their VNRs. Next. And this is something that I believe you will hopefully find interesting. You have access to the link. If you want information on specific indicators, you can click on these links, and it should take you straight to information related to methodology, capacity development, related documentation. So this is a useful tool, hopefully. Next. Of course, there are many challenges, and hopefully some of these will come up in the next minutes. There are still many data gaps, and I suspect that is a very big problem in the Caribbean. As you see here, 57% of data availability for Tier 1 and Tier 2 indicators, and these are already established indicators. There's still many new indicators that still need to be rolled out and data collected for those. There's a huge demand for disaggregated data, for example, by gender, and methodologies to do that are still being developed. A lot of countries don't have capacity for a lot of this data collection, and so thinking about alternative or alternate data sources. Huge problems of institutional coordination within countries. Different ministries collect different indicators, so how to combine that, how to have coordination across these ministries. And also how to then use this information for evidence-based decision making. Next. So FAO is really focusing in the coming years on 5 particular capacity development areas. And this is a summary. If we go to the next slide, then we can see in more detail what each of these are. So the first one is methodological development. We still have 1 Tier 3 indicator, so we'll try to move that to Tier 2. We're in the process of trying to develop standard methods, data disaggregation. What's most important is provide documentation for countries, so guidelines for countries to be able to use for data collection and reporting. The next. So there are tons of data gaps, helping countries identify what those are, and thinking about how to align the whole national SDG process with the international global indicator framework. Oftentimes these don't match, so countries report in their national platforms on SDG indicators, but that's different from what's being reported internationally. So it's to try to help countries align those 2 information sources. It's also trying to help countries build their capacity in statistics, so working with countries to develop master plans. And then it's trying to help actually identify who's collecting what data within countries and making sure people know about that, both within countries and between countries. Next. FAO is also really active in trying to develop new types of data collection tools. This is just an example. You see here AGRIS, that should be an alternative to agricultural censuses. We're also trying to experiment with innovative data collection activities like geospatial data. So that's quite exciting and interesting. Okay, next. Looks like we have a low battery. If we can go to the next slide. Again, trying to support countries in the adoption of these indicators around these topics that are very relevant to FAO. And then the last activity is really about making sure that these activities are all contributing to collecting information. So the fifth activity is making sure that FAO can work with countries to collect information that can actually be used. This would not be worth it if all of this information just sits in a database. So it's really trying to ensure that this information can be integrated into evidence-based decision-making within countries. And that's it. That's the last slide. And I thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your comments.
So thank you very much, Amy, for your presentation and for miraculously sticking to the allocated time with all the technical difficulties. And I think like it's very interesting to see how like and there was some comments here during your presentation how vast the efforts on data and on capacity development are. And there are some questions, some related questions to data that we already were collecting from the forums. Some of them you might have an answer for. If you don't have an answer, because they might be very country specific or very even region specific, we still would check with the officers from the Caribbean or from the Latin American, the Caribbean offices, and we'll let you know of the exact answer. But I think, Amy, you can provide already some parts of some insights. And one, for example, one question comes from Juan. He intervened before, but he also posted the question in the forums. And his question reads, what are currently some of the most successful cases in setting up SDG dashboards for the Caribbean for effectively monitoring progress? We're using the word SDG dashboards and dashboards in reference to the SDG dashboard initiative that is basically this attempt to compile and to have the first dashboard of indicators to kind of provide an outlook of how data is being measured everywhere in the world. So that initiative might not be exhaustive, but we would like to hear more how countries set up this. What do we have to measure? How do we measure? How do we collect it? How is data available for us, and so on?
I think that that's a really interesting question, and I would like to come back with you with concrete examples. Maybe I can communicate this information to Javier who posted, but I think out of this question, I would like to make a really important point, as I made in my presentation. When you say dashboards, I think you're probably meaning national reporting platforms. And that's the official title and name that's assigned to the information about SDGs that's disseminated by country. What's really important about this, as I stated, is oftentimes the information that appears in this national reporting platform is different from the information that's appearing in the international reporting platform. So I would say that any successful case would be where these two platforms are very much aligned. In some cases, even some of the indicators are different. So countries post different indicators than are the ones that are really aligned with the SDGs. So I come back to you some best practices, but I would just like to say that what's really important is to make sure that the information is consistent in both platforms.
Thank you very much, Amy. Another question that came, and it was like, so, and this comes from Wu Zhao, and but there are two other questions that were a bit country specific, one from the Dominican Republic and another one from Costa Rica. So maybe I'm going for the most generic ones first. And is there any information sharing between Caribbean countries and other countries, or how is there comprehensive information sharing among Caribbean countries? So the question, to put it in more generic terms, is like, how are countries sharing information or data collection capacity development within each other? How, if they want to know how they measure data, how they measure progress, how can they learn from each other?
I think that's a really good opportunity, and to the best of my knowledge, being able to research this before this webinar, I understand that there's currently no mechanism that currently exists in the Caribbean. And this for sure is one of the points that I'll take back to my colleagues. I think for starters, what's important is to identify the focal points within each of the countries and to try to establish a network of people who can communicate with each other and help support each other in this process. What I understand in the Caribbean is an issue is that there's not much capacity within countries to be able to collect all of these indicators and to be able to develop some sort of mechanism for better information sharing. I think would be worthwhile. I even looked online to see about your VNRs. I see many countries in the Caribbean between 2016 and 2019 aren't even producing them. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of opportunities to try to build capacity within countries to do that.
So building capacities on data, and now considering FAO's role on this. There's a question from Carla that refers to how it's done with Costa Rica, but this question could be applied to everyone. So it's like, how is the information between FAO or FAO officials and government officials working on data? How does it work? Is it a direct link, or is it like a link through FAO and the government, and then some days they talk about data? How connected are they?
If I understand your question, it's about how the information is communicated or collected from a country to FAO, and I would say that it's very much country specific. It really depends how a country is set up. Some countries, for example, have a coordination mechanism within the country that communicate directly with the FAO. There's often a focal point, as I mentioned, and it's really important, and I will try to get a copy of the list for you if there are focal points for the Caribbean who have been identified. Oftentimes it's through the National Statistical Office. There's somebody who's collecting SDG indicators. Sometimes it's fragmented across countries, and it becomes very difficult for FAO to work with countries because there are different ministries that are responsible for different indicators. So it really depends what the process is, but I would say most of the time it's through the National Statistical Office, and often there's a focal point within the National Statistical Office who serves as the interlocutor with FAO.
Oh, thank you for this, and apologies because my question was not very clear, so thank you for turning it around to something that is understandable. And there's another question here from someone who added his name Jamaica. I'm not sure who you are, but thank you for your question for your comments. That I'm gonna turn into a question with a bit of introduction, and it's what that person says is that the infrastructure for data collection, analysis, and dissemination in the Caribbean is merely absent. And one comment on that is that also for many countries, just the sheer size of those countries, there are some Caribbean states that are like under 100,000 people, and that's a state, that's a country, that's a nation recognized by the UN. Of course, that's very difficult to compare when it comes to data capacities with big countries within the Latin American and Caribbean region, or even within the Caribbean region if we compare with Jamaica. So how can SIDS develop data capacity? So who should they lean on to develop that if they are very small countries, or if they have limited resources for that?
I'm definitely not an expert in these countries, but I understand that this is a problem for all SIDS countries for sure, and currently there's nothing in place, any sort of guidance, but I think this would be worthwhile to bring back to FAO. What I do know for the Caribbean is that there's been talk about building institution capacity. There's something in the pipeline together with OCS states to try to build capacity within country for data collection and analysis. So some work is already starting to take place in this area. As I mentioned, AGRIS, this is a 10-year cycle, so it's an alternative to agricultural censuses, which I know is quite a burden to most countries. expensive. It happens once every 10 years, and there's really not much capacity to continue or to do that. So AGRIS really has different modules that are taken through a farm survey. It's done sample. And the idea is to try to collect data periodically. So there's one or two modules that are collected annually, and others are collected once every 2 or 3 or 5 years, depending on the priorities of countries. So FAO is trying to come up with more cost-effective ways for countries to try to collect this information. Through this AGRIS survey, and I think that there's been talk about one country in the Caribbean that I won't mention that might be moving forward in piloting AGRIS. There should be 5 SDG indicators that could potentially be collected through this new type of data collection tool. So to be updated as soon as some of that activity starts to take place with this sub-regional statistician who will start moving. I think also that there will be a training on one of the SDG indicators, Agricultural Orientation Index. And so I'm excited to see what type of work will now start rolling out within your area.
Thank you for bringing back AGRIS again and its contribution, especially for agriculture indicators. And I would also try to recall what you mentioned during the presentation about the progress that's been made when it comes to changing the nature. Like, I'm going to use the word nature in the lack of a better one, but like from changing from tier 2 indicators to tier 1 indicators, and from tier 3 indicators to tier 2 indicators for the indicators that FAO is custodian. The one comment that came from the forums was even now if we know how to measure those things and we have the support from AGRIS, we still lack the capacities and interest to measure environmental variables. So how do you think we could improve on that? How do you think we could start giving more importance to that? Or why should it matter to measure, I don't know, pollution as we measure, for example, poverty?
If I understand your question, is how can countries that don't have the capacity measure important indicators like environmental indicators that you mentioned, like pollution? I think one of the possible solutions is exactly what you mentioned before. It's trying to do resource mobilization and partnering with the private sector and other partnerships. I think it's building networks within the sub-region and thinking about information sharing about best practices. I think FAO will try to help support that communication and think about creative ways to try to have information flow and be able to depend on each other in terms of data collection and information sharing. I mean, your points are well taken. Of course, everything takes resources and capacity to be able to do that. It's a slow process, and I think that that's one of the benefits of the SDGs is to try to help identify some of those gaps and then to try to address those. But you're right, it's a huge burden for countries, but I think we're making a lot of progress.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I think we might move on to the wrap up to stick to the allocated time for people who have other plans and who are considering that this webinar would last 1 hour. So thank you, Amy, for your presentation and for answering to your questions. If any of you, we are aware that all of you have more questions for Amy regarding the topics covered during this whole seminar. You could share them in Forum 5, in question 2 of Forum 5. You can write them, and we will do our best to answer them before the platform closes. And now this is a bit like housekeeping work when it comes to the seminar. And this is a reminder for all of you for the ones who have not made it, who have not done it yet, to complete the final survey. If you want to get a certificate of completion from this seminar, that's compulsory. We need to for people to participate in that survey and share their experiences from their countries, for us to be able to issue that certificate. Related to that, the virtual platform, along with that, there is the requirement of participating in the forum questions, and this considers the forum questions for all sections, and for section 5 you don't necessarily have to participate in question number 2 because that's basically posing a question, so it's fine. And another reminder that the platform will close at midnight on Friday, 7th December. So you make sure to finish with the activities, including the final survey, by then. And thank you again for participating. And what we're gonna do with all the inputs that we've been collecting from your participation in forums and so on, and from the survey, is that we're going to analyze that data. We're going to try to come up with some common issues, priorities, suggestions, and ideas for future programming for FAO or for future networking activities when it comes to a possible community of practice that might include people from the Caribbean or people from the whole region, Latin America and the Caribbean. That's still to decide. But you should know that apart from what you might be getting from the contents from this, for example, this webinar or the other parts of the seminar, we also learning from you. We hope to kind of build on this and to include you in future steps on the work for advancing the SDGs from the FAO perspective in the Caribbean region. Thanks to all of you, and again, behind this facilitation team, there's more people than just me. I'm the one who speaks the most. That doesn't mean I'm the one who works the most. And lastly, I would like to excuse Evie, who could not make it to this webinar in the end. Something very urgent came up, and she couldn't make it. But she's very happy to see that the participation has been high. And if you have any more questions, any more issues you want to discuss, we can continue in the forums up until Friday. So thank you very much, and have a nice end of this seminar, and hopefully see you soon in future initiatives.